My name is John Keeney. I'm one of the pastors at King Avenue United Methodist Church in the West Ohio Conference, and I'm pleased to have with me three retired bishops of our church, Bishop Joseph Yackel, Bishop C. Joseph Sprague, and Bishop Judith Craig. They have a lot of experience in our denomination, and I think it's important to draw on their experience and their wisdom, because from those two characteristics, we can draw hope. And I'm in the firm belief that this conversation will be a hopeful one for the future of our denomination and our churches. So I'd like to welcome Bishop Yackel, Bishop Craig, and Bishop Sprague. And we'll start with you, Bishop Yackel. Just briefly, where you served and where you were bishop.
Well, I'm part of the former EUB church that became a part of the United Methodist Church in 1968. I started out as an assistant pastor for 3 years. I was sent to a church that had been sold, and the pastor had been removed, and they had 2 years to get out, and 4 months had already passed, and I'd never served a church on my own before, but that's where I went, managed to survive, and from there it was to the United Methodist Agency work. I was with the Board of Evangelism, and by a strange set of circumstances, when the EUBs took in the Methodists in 1968, I became one of two general secretaries. I was with the Board of Evangelism, and in 72 I was elected a bishop. And I'm the longest serving living bishop today. It's great to be here. That and a cup of coffee still cost you about $1.50, so it's okay.
And in what areas were you bishop?
I was up in the Syracuse area. I had 3 annual conference in the from Syracuse to Albany and all the way the rest of the state. And then I was 12 years in the Baltimore, Washington area. And 6 of those 12 years, I also had the Peninsula Conference. So I had 3 conferences, then 2 conferences. And I've been retired then since 1996. Anyhow, I'm retired.
Okay. Thank you.
24 years.
Thank you. Bishop Craig.
I'm a product of the West Ohio Conference. No, the East Ohio Conference. I served in the East Ohio Conference as an associate pastor, a pastor, as conference council director, and it was from that office that I was elected a bishop in 1984, sent to Michigan. From Ohio, that's a dangerous thing, but I managed to understand what color I needed to bleed up there. And I had the whole of Michigan, 2 conferences, the Detroit Conference and the West Michigan Conference. Then in 1992, I came to West Ohio and learned to bleed red again, and retired from this conference in 2000.
Thank you. Thank you. Bishop Sprague.
I'm kind of an anomaly in that I was raised evangelical Quaker in the inner city, which is almost unheard of. Became a United Methodist when I was led to examine the Methodist Theological School in Ohio and found the home for which I had long been looking. I served for 32 years in the pastorate, 1 rural congregation, mostly inner city, 1 urban university, and 1 metro. In addition to that, 8 years as an ecumenical interfaith officer in both Boston and Cincinnati, and then 8 years as the resident bishop in the Chicago area, Northern Illinois Conference.
Thank you. Thank you. In the local church, pastors hear a lot anymore about the covenant, the United Methodist covenant that we entered into when we were ordained. And I'd like to know what is your understanding and what is your experience of the United Methodist covenant into which pastors enter?
Well, it's in the ordination service. It's in the description of an elder, that you will be in covenant with other elders. For me, and I was asked if I would be in covenant with other bishops when I was consecrated a bishop. For me, that meant keeping in common with them what we understood to be the United Methodist way. Got to be tough sometimes because the United Methodist way and my conscience don't always agree. And in that sense, covenant becomes a rub, a sore spot.
Can you give an example of where your conscience and the covenant did not agree?
Well, there are lots of things in the Book of Discipline that I promised to uphold that I thought were jabberwocky. Some simple things like, I never thought the pastor ought to chair the nominations committee in a local church. But when somebody would try to make that happen, not be the pastor, I'd have to say, no, it's pastor. But I didn't think that was right. But I know you're wanting to know something else that I am in conflict with. I am in conflict with the Book of Discipline's stance on homosexuality.
But that then brings, I think we'd all agree, not with the particulars, but with the ideas that Julie's spoken about. But we don't have a sense of what our discipline recognizes as the basic understanding, and then other things, which is most of what's in our Book of Discipline. It's not in the Constitution. It's in the other part of it that gets us in trouble. And we're going to come back to the issue that brings us together today, because in 1972, at the very last session of General Conference, were you, either of you, in that delegation in 72?
No, but I was reading the minutes.
Well, in 72, this was the first time after the United Methodist Church had been formed that we'd had a quadrennium of life together. And at the very last service, one of the lay persons who was sitting about 20 feet from where us general secretaries, I was general secretary at that time of the Board of Evangelism, and this gentleman got the microphone. It was near the end of the afternoon, and he said simply, I want to make a motion to the extent that the practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. And I move that it be a part of our social principles. That social principles are not Constitution. It got a simple majority. It was never debated, and that's how it got into the social principles. And from there it has drifted into other parts that have become totally restrictive and absolutely wrong. And that's where the issue is that we're joined in now.
You know, if I might, Bishop Thomas chaired the Commission on the Social Principles, you may remember, and he brought that report to the General Conference, and he was so proud of those social principles, and they had worked so hard on every section. And he told me later that his heart was broken when that amendment was made, because in the commission they had debated and prayed and come to the conclusion that their paragraph on human sexuality was complete as it was, and that he felt it violated the whole intent. He was grieved by that.
But this is exactly the issue. It's not constitutional.
Right.
It's a simple passing of a statement by a majority vote, 51%. No debate, no study, and it just lodges there and then fades on in.
I've looked at covenant, I guess, a little bit differently. I've seen it more as a broad guideline a set of understandings, much like a team ethos that we share as clergy, that we buy into. But I never understood some of the various components to be either or, you must, you must, you must. For example, it bothered me when some clergy would say, I'm not going to pay apportionments. I'm not going to support that because I don't believe A, B, C, or D. Or during a time of terrible racial unrest, when the covenant is clear about the nature of what the church should be in terms of racially inclusive. There were a number of clergy who not only didn't support that, who stood in opposition to it. Same was true when women began, of all things, women began to emerge as potential candidates for ministry. I disagreed vehemently with my colleagues on those things, but it never seemed to me it was never anything I would consider to file a complaint against them or to try to push them away. It was something to discuss, to debate in the spirit of our team. And so I've been perplexed, I guess, since we've gotten into this time of adjudication. Why, for example, in this conference, in the West Ohio Conference, some pastors can proudly say, I will not pay apportionments. The covenant is absolutely exact on the commitment to do that, or stand in the way of racial inclusivity. But when it comes to the matter of gay and lesbian Christians, we get adamant. It seems it's a matter of whose ox is being gored, how we pull out and bludgeon one another, or not, the so-called covenant. Personally, I've always felt that the Scripture in the quadrilateral, as you know, the four parts of the quadrilateral with Scripture being predominant, that for me, in trying to shape ministry, for the most part, is far more important than the particularities of the so-called covenant.
When I'm engaged in conversation about the covenant, we think of stipulations in the covenant, and we do think of musts. And it sounds, as I listen to you, that it's almost like the Bible. It's the spirit, not the letter, that we are
That's the way
in covenant with.
That's the way I approach both the Bible and the covenant, not as legalistic literalism, but as the guide, the symbol that we need to unearth together and live in a spirit of love and mercy with one another in doing so.
I find that helpful, Joe. There's grace in that understanding of the covenant. And in the legalistic understanding of covenant, there's no room for grace. And we, of all people, we Wesleyans, should understand grace and operate out of grace. So that's a helpful analogy for me.
In my own case, though, I made a commitment, and this is this is in opposition or over against what I just said. That is to say, in 1996, when I stood for a possible election, the homosexual issue was, of course, the hot issue, and people knew where I stood. Before there was the prohibition of performing union services, I performed union services, including one at North Broadway United Methodist Church here in Columbus. So people knew where I was. I led the debate in '84 about this issue at the General Conference, as you might remember, Judy. So people knew where I was. And so the question was, if you are elected bishop, will you stand with the discipline? Will you legislate the discipline? In retrospect, I wish I had done differently. But in that moment, because I thought it was important, not only in terms of my understanding of my ministry, but for a portion of the church that I represented, to, if I could be, to become elected, but at the same time, to honor covenant. And so I said I would honor that. And both sides of the debate knew that, and I no sooner hit the turf in Chicago,
Oh, boy.
but that the issue was joined from both sides. The wedding was done, the charge was made. Now, Bishop, what are you going to do?
Would you like to speak more to that?
Well,
Instance?
I would be glad to do that. Let me go back a little bit. When I went to Chicago, when I arrived, there was a trial on my desk that needed to be held. My predecessor had done a wonderful job trying to reach resolution on a complaint. He thought he had it done, but the person against whom the complaint was filed and his spouse refused at the last hour to sign the resolution. And so a trial was imminent. So in the first few months of my time as a rookie bishop, we had to do a trial. That was not a pleasant experience. And the person who was charged, well, moved from complaint to charge, had been a very influential person in the life of that conference. So that was a very painful moment for the conference and for me. And at that moment, I thought, if there's any way we can get around doing trials, we ought to. And so across my years there, we probably had 20 complaints in addition to what I've just described. And we were able to deal with all of those except the one about the homosexual wedding. All of those through a resolution process. Those are not easy. Sometimes they're very painful, but they can bring both mercy and justice. And I think of a number of examples, and I know Bishop Craig has them because I'm aware of some of the wonderful resolutions she was able to adjudicate. But in that instance, I had no choice. And so the cabinet and I signed the complaint. It became a charge, and ironically, one of the best, by best I mean ethical, caring, able pastors we had a church trial. Now, I testified in that trial that I did not believe the church's stance on homosexuality, and that I was absolutely fractured by having to do what I did, but I did it because the church said that's where we are. John, in retrospect, I wouldn't have said that when I stood up. I would have said, what you see is what you get. I would not have done that trial because it hurt so many people so badly. Not just gay and lesbian people, but straight people as well.